A pregnant wife lies in a hospital room, her fragile pregnancy hanging by a thread. A place that should have been completely safe. But safety vanishes the moment a jealous mistress bursts in and attacks her, while the baby in her womb fights for every heartbeat. And the husband who should have protected her. He stands there. He turns his back. He leaves her on the floor. What follows is a collision of betrayal, fear, and the kind of American justice that never excuses cruelty. Because her father is not just any father. He is the man who will drag the truth into the light and put both of them behind bars. Trust me, you will not believe how far this story goes until we step inside it. Let us know what time you are listening and where you are tuning in from. Drop a comment below. We would love to hear from you. Morning at St. Crescent Hospital unfolded under a cold, bright light that streamed through tall windows and washed the hallways in a clean white glow. It was early, yet the high-risk pregnancy unit already carried a quiet tension, the kind that lingered in places where fragile lives depended on machines and careful hands. Nurses moved softly, carts glided without sound, and everything smelled of sterilized air. Inside one of the private rooms, Emily Dawson lay propped against several pillows. The thin hospital blanket covered her swollen belly. She was 7 months pregnant, and the rhythmic sound of the fetal monitor beside her filled the room with gentle electronic beats. Each small beep offered reassurance. Each flicker of the screen told her that, for now, her baby was still holding on. Her doctor had told her earlier that she needed to stay for several days. Her blood pressure was high, and her symptoms suggested potential complications. Rest was critical. Stress was dangerous. But resting was difficult when her heart felt like it was wrapped in ice. Jason Hale, her husband, arrived a few minutes after sunrise. He did not greet her with warmth or even a tired smile. He walked in holding his phone, scrolling as he approached the bed. Emily offered him a hopeful look, but his eyes barely lifted. "You're here," she said softly, trying to sound calm. "Yeah, I had a minute," he replied, still reading something on his screen. He positioned himself near the foot of the bed, leaning against the counter instead of taking the chair beside her. Emily folded her hands over her blanket. "Can you sit with me for a bit?" she asked. Her voice trembled slightly. "It helps when you're close." Jason barely looked up. "I have meetings," he said. His tone was flat. "I can't stay long." The words landed heavily. Emily swallowed and forced a small nod. She did not want to start another argument. Not while the baby needed her calm. She shifted slightly and winced at the tightness in her abdomen. Her eyes drifted toward the window, then back to Jason. She wished he would look at her. She wished he would notice her fear. Before she could speak again, the door suddenly burst open with a force that made both of them jump. The handle slammed into the wall. A rush of cold air followed. And then she saw her. Madison Cole stood in the doorway with her teeth clenched and fury burning in her eyes. Her blonde hair framed her face like a sharp halo. Her posture was rigid, and her breath came fast. Emily's chest tightened. "What are you doing here?" Emily whispered. She instinctively pulled the blanket closer to her chest. This is a hospital." Madison stepped inside with abrupt, angry strides. "You ruined everything!" she shouted. Her voice filled the room, echoing off the walls, slicing through the quiet. Emily pushed herself upward on the bed, her heart hammering. Jason did not move to stop Madison. He did not step between them. He simply watched. "Please," Emily said with a shaky voice. "I'm pregnant. Stop." But Madison lunged forward. She grabbed the collar of Emily's hospital gown. The thin fabric tightened around Emily's neck. Emily cried out and tried to pull away, her hands trembling uncontrollably. The fetal monitor rocked beside her. Madison's eyes flashed with something wild. She yanked harder. "You think you can control him. You think he wants you," she hissed, her breath hot and bitter. "Jason!" Emily cried. "Help me!" But Jason did not step forward. He did not raise his voice. He did not even blink. He simply stood there, as if he were watching a scene unfold on a screen, detached and uninterested. Madison shoved Emily sideways with sudden force. The impact knocked Emily off balance. The fetal monitor crashed against the floor with a loud metallic clang. Emily let out a scream as she slipped, her knees hitting the edge of the mattress before she tumbled toward the side rail. Pain shot through her abdomen. The fetal monitor's disconnected wires flickered wildly. The machine beeped in panic. The alarms rose in sharp, frantic bursts. Emily clutched her belly, gasping. The pain radiated higher and higher. "My baby," she choked, barely able to breathe. Madison, still fueled by rage, stepped closer, as if ready to strike again. It was only then that footsteps began echoing from the hallway. A nurse shouted something from outside. Emily looked up through blurred vision. She saw Jason's expression shift, not to concern, but to annoyance. He looked at Madison, nodded once, and then turned toward the door. He walked out. Madison followed him. The two of them slipped out of the room just as nurses rushed in. Their silhouettes vanished down the hallway while Emily lay on the cold floor, her hands gripping her stomach, her breath broken by sobs and pain. "Help," she whispered. "Please, help us." A nurse knelt beside her immediately. Another called for the doctor. The fetal monitor was lifted from the floor, reattached to the machine, and the wires were placed back against her belly with trained precision. The nurses worked quickly, moving with controlled urgency. Emily's vision swam. Her fingers dug into the blanket. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She could hear the nurses speaking, their voices urgent but calm. "I need vitals. Now." "Her pressure is rising. Call the obstetrics team. Move her to the emergency suite. Get her stabilized." Emily felt hands lifting her gently. She felt herself being placed on a gurney. She felt the cold air of the hallway brushing over her face as she was wheeled out. But beneath the panic and the pain, one thought screamed louder than all the rest. "Jason left me." The ceiling lights passed above her in blurry streaks as she was rushed through the hall. Every beep of the monitor seemed louder than the last. Every breath felt harder to take. She clutched her belly as if she could shield her child with her hands alone. The nurse leaned close to her ear. "We're here," she said softly. "We won't leave you. Hold on for your baby." Emily closed her eyes. The world narrowed to the sound of her heartbeat, the faint trembling of her hands, and the echo of her husband's footsteps walking away. Her nightmare had only begun. The doors of the inpatient emergency suite slid open as the medical team rushed Emily inside. The wheels of the gurney squeaked softly across the polished floor. Bright ceiling lights glowed above her in a long, endless row, their cold whiteness piercing through the haze of fear hanging over her. Emily lay on her side, clutching the blanket pulled over her abdomen, her breath sharp and uneven. Every inhale felt like a fight she was losing. Two nurses moved around her with practiced coordination as they settled her onto a new hospital bed. The room smelled sterile, a mixture of antiseptic and cold air. A doctor entered quickly, his white coat flaring slightly as he approached. He adjusted his glasses and leaned over her with concern, tightening the lines around his eyes. "Emily, I need you to stay as calm as you can," he said. Voice steady but tense. "We are going to check your vitals and the baby's right now." Emily nodded weakly, but her body continued to tremble. Her breaths came in small, rapid bursts that she struggled to control. The doctor wrapped a cuff around her arm, and a nurse attached the fetal monitor across her belly. The machine lit up, and the room filled with the unsettling rhythm of irregular beeps. The doctor's brow furrowed. He scanned the numbers shifting across the monitor's screen. He didn't say anything yet. Not saying anything was worse. Emily swallowed. "My baby, please, is he okay?" she whispered, barely able to get the words out. The doctor exhaled slowly and placed a hand on her shoulder. "We are watching everything closely. I need you to breathe with me. Slow breaths, in and out." His tone remained calm, but the tension under it gave her little comfort. Emily tried to follow his instructions. She inhaled deeply, then exhaled in a shaky stream, but the fear inside her would not loosen. Tears blurred her vision as she stared up at the ceiling. Her whole body shook. She could feel the terror in her bones. One nurse adjusted her blanket and wiped sweat from her forehead. Another nurse typed notes into her chart. Despite all the hands around her, Emily felt unbearably alone. Her phone lay on the small metal tray beside her bed. With trembling fingers, she reached for it. Her hand shook so violently, she almost dropped it. She dialed Jason's number, praying he would finally answer. The call rang once. The call ended. She tried again, the same thing. Rejected in an instant. Emily's heart twisted. Jason had left her. He had watched Madison attack her, and now he refused even to pick up the phone. The weight of that reality settled over her chest like a heavy stone. She squeezed her eyes shut, letting the tears slip down her cheeks. A nurse in her late 50s entered with a clipboard. Her face carried the calm wisdom of someone who had spent decades working in maternity wards. She approached Emily gently and wrapped the blood pressure cuff around her arm again. As the cuff tightened, the nurse spoke softly. "Emily, I need to tell you what I saw earlier. I was in the hallway when it happened. Your husband was there. He didn't try to help you. He didn't stop that woman." Emily's breath hitched. She turned her face away, unable to look at anyone. She felt her heart break again, sharper than before. The nurse gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "You're safe now," the nurse said kindly. "We are here with you." When the nurse stepped away, the room returned to a cold quiet. The sound of the fetal monitor echoed sharply in Emily's ears. Each irregular beep tightened the knot of fear inside her. She pressed her palm to her abdomen and whispered through trembling lips, "Please, hold on. Please be okay." She stared up at the ceiling tiles, trying to make sense of her life collapsing within 1 hour. She thought about the moment Madison's fingers dug into her arms. She thought about the bruises already forming there. She thought about Jason walking out of the room without looking back. Why was this happening? How did love turn into something so cruel? Her muscles ached. Her ribs burned with every breath. She felt too weak to lift her head. She felt as though gravity itself was pushing her into the mattress. The fluorescent lights made the room feel colder than it was. Her tears continued to fall, soaking into the pillow beneath her. A nurse checked the monitor again. "We need her pressure lower," she whispered to another nurse. "This stress is not helping the baby." Emily could hear them, but she couldn't speak. She tucked the blanket closer to her chest, shivering. Every beep of the monitor made her flinch. She wanted her mother. She wanted comfort. She wanted someone who cared. She wanted someone who had not abandoned her. The loneliness wrapped around her like a second skin. Just as the weight of despair pressed hardest against her chest, the door burst open with sudden force. The sound startled everyone in the room. The nurses turned quickly. A tall man stood in the doorway, breathing hard as if he had sprinted down the hallway. His gray hair was slightly disheveled, his jacket unzipped, and his eyes full of fierce worry. He scanned the room until he saw her. "Emily," he said, voice breaking with emotion. Emily covered her mouth as tears streamed faster. "Dad," she whispered. Robert Dawson crossed the room in seconds. He reached for her hand immediately. The sight of her bruises made his jaw clench. He looked devastated. Emily pressed her face into his hand, relief flooding through her in an overwhelming wave. Her father was here. Her father found her. For the first time since the attack, she felt she could breathe. The nurses stepped back gently, giving them space. The cold room felt warmer. The crushing silence inside her heart finally broke. Emily closed her eyes, still holding her father's hand tightly. She felt safe for the first time since the nightmare began. And even though the fear for her baby remained, she knew she was no longer alone. Her father had come, and everything would change now. Robert Dawson stood frozen for a moment just inside the doorway of the emergency suite. His chest heaved as he tried to catch his breath after running through the hospital corridors. His eyes searched the room with frantic urgency until they landed on his daughter. Emily lay in the bed, pale and shaking, her hair tangled over the pillow and her hands trembling on top of the blanket. As soon as he saw her bruised arms, his face collapsed into shock. He moved toward her in long, determined strides. "Emily," he said, voice trembling. His eyes filled with fear and disbelief. Emily immediately reached out with weak hands. The moment he touched her, she clung to him and burst into tears. She tried to speak, but the words tangled in her throat. Her body shook violently as she buried her face into his chest, and her sobs came in broken, painful waves. Robert wrapped his arms around her carefully, terrified of hurting her, yet desperate to shield her from whatever nightmare had happened. A nurse standing near the monitor stepped closer. She had witnessed the attack and seemed equally shaken. Her voice was calm but solemn as she spoke. "Sir, your daughter was assaulted by another woman in her previous room. It happened very fast. She was pushed and grabbed. We responded as soon as we heard her screams." Robert lifted his head. His expression hardened. "Assaulted," he repeated, as if testing the weight of the word. The nurse nodded. Her husband was present during the incident. Robert turned sharply toward her. His brows narrowed. "Jason was there?" Emily lifted her head slowly. Her eyes were red and swollen. It took effort for her to form the words. "Dad, he walked away. He left me on the floor." Her voice cracked on the last syllable. Robert's jaw twitched. A vein pulsed at his temple. His hand tightened around Emily's, not in anger toward her, but because his entire body was struggling to contain the surge of rage building inside him. He inhaled through his nose and tried to steady himself, but the more he thought about her words, the more his self-control threatened to break. "Emily," he said softly, "tell me exactly what happened." She shook her head, struggling to speak through her tears. "Madison came in. She grabbed me. She pushed me. Jason just stood there. He didn't help me. He didn't say anything. He left with her. Her breath hitched sharply. He left me on the floor while the baby monitor was screaming. Robert's fingers curled around the side of her bed as he steadied himself. His eyes were dark and furious, but he tried to keep his voice gentle for her. "No husband does this," he said under his breath. The sentence came out in a low, tight tone. No man who calls himself a husband walks away from his pregnant wife while she is being attacked. Emily squeezed his hand. "Dad, please don't make it worse. I don't want more trouble." He looked at her with heartbreak in his eyes. "Trouble has already found you," he said. This is not something we can ignore." Robert straightened. His shoulders shifted from fear to resolve. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. Emily's father was not only a father, he was a former police chief. He had seen the worst of human nature. And now he was seeing it directed at his own child. That awakened an instinct he could not suppress. He turned to the nearest nurse. "I want to see the security footage," he said firmly. "All of it. Hallway cameras, room cameras, anything you have." The nurse hesitated, then nodded. "Security can provide that. I can escort you." Robert followed her out of the emergency suite and down a long hallway. His steps were fast and heavy. Every part of him felt like a wound waiting to burst. They entered the security office, where a guard sat behind a bank of monitors. The nurse explained the situation. The guard looked up, startled, and immediately began pulling up the files. The first video loaded. It showed Madison storming down the hallway with purpose in her stride. Robert watched without blinking. The second video displayed Jason standing near the doorway, scrolling his phone, then glancing up as Madison entered the room. The third video played, showing Madison pushing through the door, shouting, grabbing Emily, shaking her, and then shoving her toward the edge of the bed. But the fourth video was the one that broke something inside him. It showed Jason. It showed him watching. It showed him doing nothing as Emily screamed for help. It showed him turning his back and walking out of the room with Madison while the fetal monitor lit up with alarms. Robert's hand slammed against the back of the chair beside him. His fingers gripped the metal frame. His eyes burned with fury. He leaned forward, staring at the screen as if trying to force the moment to make sense. But it never would. He swallowed hard. "No husband does this," he said again, this time louder, the anger barely contained. He stepped back, ran a hand through his gray hair, and exhaled sharply. Emily had begged him not to make things worse, but this was no longer a domestic dispute. This was criminal. This was cruelty. This was abandonment of a pregnant woman in danger. He knew exactly what needed to be done. He walked into the hallway outside the security office and pulled his phone from his jacket. He scrolled through old contacts until he reached a name he had not used in years. His thumb hovered for only a moment before he pressed the call. The phone rang once, twice. Then a deep voice answered. "Robert, been a long time." "Harold," Robert said, struggling to keep his voice steady. "I need you. It's urgent." Harold Briggs had once been a federal investigator. He knew Robert from joint cases years ago. Their friendship was built from long nights, dangerous arrests, and trust forged in fire. "What's going on?" Harold asked. "My daughter," Robert said. "She was attacked. In a hospital. She is 7 months pregnant. Her husband watched and walked away. I need help. This can't go unpunished." Harold's voice shifted immediately. "Send me the details." "I'm coming." Robert ended the call. He stood still for a moment in the quiet hallway. closing his eyes. He took a long breath, then opened them again with renewed determination. He turned and looked toward the emergency suite where Emily waited. His anger softened into devotion. He whispered to himself with a vow that cut through the silence. "I will protect you, no matter what." And with that promise, Robert Dawson walked back toward his daughter, ready to start the fight for justice. Harold Briggs arrived at St. Crescent Hospital in just under 40 minutes, his old sedan pulling up near the emergency entrance with a low growl. He stepped out quickly, his coat still half-buttoned, his expression sharp and focused. Years of federal investigative work had given him a presence that turned heads without trying. When he entered the building, a nurse pointed him toward the high-risk pregnancy unit where Robert waited. Robert stood near the nurse's station, arms folded tightly across his chest. The exhaustion on his face could not hide the resolute fire in his eyes. The moment he saw Briggs, his expression softened into something like relief. The two men shook hands, but it was not a polite greeting. It was a grip full of shared history, trust, and understanding. Briggs held Robert's gaze for a moment. "Let's get to work," he said quietly. Without wasting time, Briggs asked to meet hospital security. The guards recognized him immediately from past collaborations and granted him full access. He moved from one monitor to another, requesting the footage from the hallway outside Emily's room, the room cameras, the elevator feed, and even the waiting area. The staff watched as he moved with precision, mapping out the sequence of events with the efficiency of someone who had done this hundreds of times. Meanwhile, Robert gathered written statements from the nurses who witnessed the aftermath. Their voices trembled slightly when they recounted how Emily had been found on the floor, clutching her stomach. He also spoke with the attending doctor, who described the irregular fetal heart rate and the dangerous spike in Emily's blood pressure. Briggs joined him shortly after, carrying a stack of printed screenshots from the camera footage. "We have angles from 3 hallways and her room," he said. "Everything matches what we saw earlier." Robert took a breath to steady himself. While the investigation unfolded, Emily was transferred to a safer recovery room with reinforced monitoring equipment. Nurses helped settle her in, adjusting pillows behind her back and checking her vitals. When she learned her father and Briggs were gathering evidence, she felt both comfort and fear. Comfort that someone was fighting for her. Fear of what would unfold next. A nurse reassured her gently, "Your dad is making sure you're protected." Emily nodded, but her eyes still carried the heaviness of the attack. She held her belly as if shielding her baby from the memory. Across the city, completely detached from the chaos they had caused, Jason and Madison sat in a high-end restaurant surrounded by soft music and dim lighting. Their table glowed under a chandelier, while waiters moved elegantly between guests. Jason swirled his drink and scrolled through his phone. Madison laughed at something on the menu. Neither acted like people who had left a pregnant woman bruised and terrified hours earlier. They savored their dinner as though nothing significant had happened. At that same moment, back in the security office, Robert stared at a freeze frame from the camera footage. It showed Madison grabbing Emily's hospital gown and Jason standing stiffly near the doorway. Robert's eyes darkened with every second he looked at it. There was anger, yes, but beneath it, a deep sadness for the daughter he had not been able to protect in time. Briggs placed another set of documents beside him. He tapped one of the printed images. "This is felony assault. No question," he said firmly. Robert nodded, jaw clenched. She was 7 months pregnant, inside a hospital. His voice cracked with fury. Briggs nodded again and reached for his phone. "I'm calling the district attorney." His tone was calm, but even he could not hide the indignation in his voice. "They need to be updated immediately." He stepped aside and began listing the evidence. Camera footage, nurse testimony, doctor's assessment, photographs of bruises, timeline consistency. After reviewing the details, the district attorney requested everything. All video files, audio logs, witness statements, and medical documentation. Emily rested in her room as her father spoke with the prosecutor on the phone. She could hear his voice outside in the hallway, low and intense. Though she couldn't make out every word, she understood enough. He was fighting for justice with the same force he used to fight criminals throughout his career. Hearing his determination steadied her heart. Her hands stopped trembling for the first time since the attack. A hospital administrator entered her room to inform her that they had filed an official report documenting the assault. "This will support the legal process," the administrator said. "Your safety is our priority." Emily nodded with gratitude. She felt vulnerable, bruised, and exhausted, but she also felt seen. As word spread through the staff, a small group of volunteer attorneys from a women's protection network arrived at the hospital to offer support. They had heard about the attack from a nurse who worked with their organization. They approached Emily gently and explained they were available to assist her if she needed legal protection. Emily thanked them quietly, her voice too weak to say much more. Robert decided he could not leave the hospital. He went to the front desk and arranged temporary lodging in the family rest area down the hall. He moved his small duffel bag into the room and returned to Emily's bedside. He would stay as long as necessary. Leaving her alone was not an option. Briggs spent the next hour reviewing Jason's behavior. He examined each frame, noting that Jason showed no signs of shock or fear. Instead, he displayed detachment and impatience. To Briggs, this was a clear indicator of involvement, or at least approval. "There are signs of incitement here," he said. He wanted Madison to confront her. Maybe he didn't expect it to get violent, but he certainly didn't intervene. Robert listened silently. His eyes were fixed on the floor, his hands curled into fists at his sides. The attending doctor delivered the final documents needed for legal processing. He confirmed the bruising pattern consistent with physical assault and noted the unstable condition of the fetus during the emergency response. He handed the report to Briggs, who added it to the growing file. When the collection was complete, Briggs let out a slow breath. "We're building a solid case," he said. "More than solid. This will hold up in court." Robert nodded. His voice was steady. "Good. They will not get away with what they did to my daughter." He turned toward Emily's room. With each step, his resolve grew harder. The system was moving. Justice was waking up. And the war for Emily's protection had truly begun. The district attorney's office felt colder than the hospital, with its white walls, metal filing cabinets, and the constant hum of fluorescent lights. Madison Cole sat stiffly in a chair across from an investigator, her legs crossed tightly, her eyes darting anxiously from one corner of the room to the other. She had been called in for questioning, and the moment she arrived, her phone had been taken as evidence. She protested at first, but the investigator remained calm and professional. The district attorney entered with a tablet in hand. "We are examining your device for any information relevant to the assault," he explained. His tone was neutral, almost gentle, but Madison could sense the pressure behind it. She watched him unlock her phone and scroll through her messages. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The first message he read aloud echoed through the room. "Go scare her." Madison's lips parted slightly, and she inhaled sharply, as if the words themselves struck her. She shifted in her seat, her composure cracking. The district attorney continued scrolling. She won't fight back. Madison's shoulders sank. The investigator beside her made notes, his expression unreadable. One more message appeared on the screen. I'm done with this marriage. The silence that followed felt suffocating. The district attorney lifted his gaze from the screen and looked directly at Madison. These are from Jason Hale, he said. Madison stared at the table. Her throat tightened. She tried to speak, but found no words. The truth was now staring back at her in undeniable form, and Jason's involvement was no longer hidden behind whispers or suspicion. It was written in his own digital trail. At the hospital, Robert Dawson stood beside Harold Briggs as they reviewed the printed text messages. Robert's hands began to tremble. He clenched the papers so tightly that the edges wrinkled. Briggs placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. We are logging all of this as evidence, Briggs said. Every message will be catalogued. Robert nodded without speaking. His eyes remained fixed on the ink on the page, as if burned by the betrayal shown there. Jason had not only abandoned Emily, he had encouraged the confrontation that left her bruised and terrified. Robert exhaled shakily, his anger turning into a deep, simmering determination. Inside Emily's room, a doctor approached with gentle steps. Emily's face remained pale. Her fingers curled protectively around her belly. The doctor gave her a tentative smile, but his eyes revealed the truth. The baby is still in a dangerous condition, he said. We are doing everything we can. Emily nodded, though her lips trembled. The fear she carried felt heavier than before. Tears welled in her eyes, and she pressed the back of her hand to her mouth to stifle a sob. She whispered a promise to herself and her unborn child. I will keep you safe, no matter what. Across town, in the district attorney's office, the news of the subpoena spread quickly. Madison overheard a staff member mention that the district attorney had requested a meeting with Robert Dawson and Harold Briggs. She felt her breath catch. Panic rose sharply inside her. Meanwhile, Jason Hale stood in their upscale kitchen, pacing back and forth with agitation. He held his phone to his ear, speaking rapidly. Don't say anything, he said. Do not talk to anyone. Especially not the DA. His voice was sharp, impatient. The more he spoke, the more it became clear that he was trying to maintain control. Madison sat in her apartment later that evening, replaying Jason's instructions in her mind. His words made her stomach twist with dread. For the first time, she wondered if Jason might abandon her just as he had abandoned Emily. The thought terrified her. Back at the hospital, Robert and Briggs prepared to meet with the district attorney. When they arrived at his office, the district attorney spread several folders out on the conference table. This is the evidence we have so far, he said. Video footage, witness statements, text messages, photographs of the bruises, medical documentation. Robert listened closely, his jaw tight. Briggs reviewed each page with careful attention. The district attorney leaned forward, folding his hands. With this evidence, he said slowly, we can issue arrest warrants today. Robert nodded. His voice was low but steady. Do it. When they returned to Emily's room, Robert sat at her bedside and gently squeezed her shoulder. You're safe now, he whispered. Emily closed her eyes, letting the reassurance wash over her. Across the city, Jason received a call from an acquaintance. The police were at my office, the man said. They're looking for you. Jason's face drained of color. What do you mean they're looking for me? They're asking questions. Serious questions. Jason hung up and immediately began throwing clothes into a suitcase. His movements were frantic. He grabbed passports, cash, and anything else he thought he might need. His mind raced. He needed to leave the state. He needed to get away before the police found him. Madison arrived at his apartment in a panic. "Jason, what is happening?" "You need to calm down," he snapped. "We're leaving." "Leaving?" she repeated, almost horrified. "Why are we leaving? What did you do?" Jason glared at her. "This is your fault, too. If you hadn't pushed her so hard, none of this would be happening." Madison's breath caught. "You told me to confront her," she said. Her voice trembled. "You told me she wouldn't fight back." Jason threw a handful of clothes into the suitcase. "Stop talking," he said sharply. Madison's eyes filled with fear and disbelief. She backed away slowly. She no longer felt certain he would protect her. As they argued, police officers received their final directive. The arrest warrants had been approved. Officers moved quickly, coordinating their positions around Jason's building and the surrounding streets. Their radios crackled softly. Engines rumbled. Lights flashed once in silent readiness. The order was given, and within moments, law enforcement launched the search that would change everything. The highway leading out of the city stretched like a long silver ribbon under the afternoon sun. Cars moved steadily in both directions, but one dark SUV stood out as it darted between lanes with growing urgency. Inside the vehicle, Jason Hale gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles pale from pressure, his jaw clenched with each passing mile. His mind raced faster than the speedometer climbing in front of him. Beside him, Madison Cole sat curled into the passenger seat, her eyes wide and filled with panic. She kept glancing back at the road behind them, as if expecting the entire police force to materialize out of thin air. Her breath shook with every inhale. "We shouldn't have touched her," she cried suddenly. Her voice cracked in the confined space. "We shouldn't have gone there. Jason, what were we thinking?" Jason shot her a furious look. "Shut up," he snapped. "Not now." Madison flinched at the sharpness of his voice. Her hands trembled violently as she pressed them against her knees. She wanted to ask more. She wanted answers, but his expression silenced her completely. Unbeknownst to them, a traffic camera mounted high above the highway had captured the SUV's license plate as it sped past. Within minutes, the system flagged the vehicle, and an automated alert pinged a nearby patrol unit. The officer in the patrol car glanced at his screen, his eyes narrowing. The SUV matched the description tied to the warrant that had been issued. The officer activated his radio. "Dispatch, I have a visual on the suspect vehicle heading northbound toward Interstate 25, requesting backup." From the patrol car behind them, the flashing lights suddenly ignited in a burst of red and blue. The siren let out a sharp chirp, then a longer wail. Jason stiffened. His jaw dropped slightly in disbelief. "Jason," Madison whispered. "They're behind us." Jason pressed his foot harder on the accelerator. "They won't catch us." "Not now." The patrol car maintained its pursuit, closing the distance. Another unit joined from an on-ramp, merging behind the first car with lights activated. The officers coordinated over the radio, forming a controlled pattern as they followed the fleeing SUV. Madison's breaths turned into sobs. "Jason, please. We can't do this. We can't outrun them. This is getting worse. Please stop." Jason ignored her, his eyes locked on the road ahead. The green sign for exit 143 of Interstate 25 appeared in the distance. The exit curved sharply to the right, leading toward a forested area and a service road. Jason swerved across 2 lanes to reach it. Behind them, the officers moved quickly. One car accelerated to block the shoulder, while another sped ahead to cut off the exit ramp. Their engines roared as they executed the maneuver with precision. When Jason reached the off-ramp, 2 cruisers were already positioned in a V-shape across the road. Their lights flashed violently, bouncing off the surrounding pine trees. Jason slammed the brakes. The SUV screeched loudly, tires burning against asphalt, and came to a violent stop only inches from the barrier formed by the police vehicles. The rear of the SUV fishtailed slightly before settling. Madison screamed and clutched the dashboard. Her entire body shook. Through the windshield, officers aimed their weapons and shouted commands. "Hands where we can see them! Now!" Jason froze. His chest heaved. Sweat dripped down his forehead. The illusion of control that he had clung to so tightly began to shatter. The driver's side door opened first as officers moved in with swift, coordinated force. Madison was yanked from the passenger seat, her arms pinned behind her back as metal handcuffs snapped around her wrists. She cried out in shock. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she sobbed. "We shouldn't have touched her. I swear we didn't mean it." One officer guided her away from the SUV as she stumbled. Her face was streaked with tears. She trembled so hard her knees nearly gave out. On the other side of the vehicle, Jason shoved the door open and bolted. He sprinted toward the dense pine trees lining the edge of the road. His shoes kicked up gravel. His breath tore through his chest. He ran blindly, desperate for any form of escape. A federal agent, part of the team alerted by radio, darted after him with quick, efficient movements. He closed the distance easily. It took only seconds for him to catch up. With a sudden burst of speed, the agent tackled Jason from behind. Jason hit the ground face first, a cloud of dust rising around him. He groaned and tried to twist away, but the agent pinned him effortlessly. "It wasn't me," Jason cried, his voice cracking. "She did it. Madison did everything. I didn't touch her. It wasn't me." The agent pressed a knee between Jason's shoulder blades and secured his wrists. "You are under arrest," he said, as he recited the Miranda rights with unwavering clarity. Jason continued to shout, his voice a mixture of fear and desperation, but it changed nothing. His words scattered into the wind like debris. From where she stood with another officer, Madison turned and screamed at him. "You told me to do it!" she shouted hysterically. "You told me to confront her. You said she wouldn't fight back." Jason stopped struggling, his face drained of color. Nearby, a cluster of reporters who had been tracking updates arrived in vans and cars. They spilled out with cameras raised, capturing the scene from every angle. The flashing lights of the police vehicles reflected off the lenses, creating a chaotic storm of shutter clicks and recorded footage. In the distance, inside the hospital, Harold Briggs stood near a counter as a police radio quietly played in the background. The dispatcher's voice crackled through. "Suspects apprehended at exit 143. Both in custody." Briggs closed his eyes briefly and exhaled with relief. At that exact moment, in her recovery room, Emily rested peacefully. In the hallway outside her door, Robert Dawson stood by the window. His arms were folded, but his posture had softened. When he heard a nurse mention that the suspects had been caught, he lowered his head. He closed his eyes and let a long, weary breath escape. Not victory, not revenge. Just a father letting the tension drain from his body after learning that the people who hurt his daughter were now powerless to harm her again. The interrogation wing of the precinct felt colder than the rest of the building. Fluorescent lights hummed above the narrow hallway, casting a pale glow over the smooth concrete floors. Officers moved quietly between rooms, their voices low and controlled. Behind one of the heavy metal doors, Madison Cole sat with her hands cuffed in front of her. Her breathing was uneven, and her mascara had smeared down her cheeks from hours of crying. She stared at the table, unable to look at anyone in the room. A detective slid a glass of water toward her. "Madison, we need your statement," he said gently. "Tell us what happened." Madison swallowed hard. Her voice came out shaky. "Jason told me to confront her," she whispered. "He started everything. He said she wouldn't fight back. He said he needed her out of the way." The words spilled out like water breaking through a dam. She did not hesitate. She did not try to soften anything. Fear pushed her to reveal everything. Across the hallway, in another interrogation room, Jason Hale sat with his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His jaw clenched. His expression was sharp, defensive, and desperate. When the detective entered, Jason lifted his chin with false confidence. "We know about the messages," the detective said as he took a seat. "We know what happened at the hospital." Jason leaned forward. "Madison acted alone," he insisted. "She is unstable. She went too far. I had nothing to do with it." The detective raised an eyebrow. "So you are saying you had no involvement at all?" "That's right," Jason replied quickly. "She misunderstood everything. She twisted my words. I didn't tell her to do anything." Back in Madison's room, the detective listened to her confession, recording every detail. Madison wiped her eyes with the back of her cuffed hands. "He promised he would handle everything," she said. "He said he would protect me. But he left me too. He's trying to save himself." The moment both statements were documented, the investigators compared notes. It took only minutes to see how quickly the pair had turned on each other. Neither showed loyalty. Neither tried to protect the other. Each blamed the other entirely. Their betrayal was immediate and complete. In Jason's room, the detective pressed a button on a small remote. A wall monitor flickered on, showing the footage from the hospital security cameras. Jason's face drained of color. He watched himself standing in the doorway, unmoving, while Madison grabbed Emily. He watched himself turning away as Emily fell. He watched himself leaving with Madison while alarms sounded. He stared at the screen, his mouth falling open slightly. For the first time since his arrest, fear overtook arrogance. His fingers twitched near the edge of the metal table. His breathing became shallow. "Care to explain this?" the detective asked calmly. Jason shook his head, unable to form a coherent excuse. In Madison's room, investigators placed printed copies of the text messages on the table. Madison saw the words in black and white, her own name linked to Jason's instructions. She broke down in tears, shoulders shaking. She cried so hard, the investigator had to pause the interview for a moment to allow her to calm herself. "These messages," he said gently, "are very clear." Madison nodded through her sobs. I know," her voice cracked. "I should have stopped. I should have walked away." At the precinct entrance, Jason's lawyer arrived in a rush. He entered the interrogation room with a briefcase in hand, trying to reassert control. "We want to postpone questioning until we have full access to case files," the lawyer demanded. The prosecutor rejected the request immediately. "Not today," she said firmly. "Not with the amount of evidence we have." Back at the hospital, Emily Dawson had been transferred to a more stable recovery room. The lighting was softer here. The beeping of the monitor was steadier. The nurses moved with quiet care around her. She rested against the pillows, exhausted but safe for the moment. When evening came, a nurse entered gently and turned on the small television mounted on the wall. Emily watched with wide eyes as a breaking news report flashed across the screen. The footage showed Jason Hale being led out of a police vehicle in handcuffs. His expression was grim, and reporters crowded around him shouting questions he refused to answer. Emily placed her hand on her belly. The baby shifted inside her, a tiny movement that filled her with warmth. She whispered softly, "You're safe now." Her father, Robert Dawson, stood by the window near her bed. The stress of the past 24 hours etched lines into his face, but a small measure of relief appeared when Emily whispered those words. He turned toward her with a gentle expression, knowing she had finally begun to feel protected. Outside Emily's room, hospital staff hung a bright red notice on the door. It read that Jason Hale and Madison Cole were prohibited from entering the premises. Security personnel were instructed not to allow them within the building for any reason. Emily's story spread quickly through the hospital. Nurses, doctors, and even patients wrote short messages of encouragement. A local women's support group sent a stack of handwritten notes to her room. Many said things like, "You're stronger than you know," and "We are standing with you." Emily read each message slowly, her heart swelling with gratitude. Meanwhile, in an office down the hall, Harold Briggs gathered folders and digital files. He organized hospital footage, police reports, witness statements, and printed screenshots. He moved with practiced efficiency, preparing everything that would be needed for trial. His experience told him that cases like this could turn complex quickly, and he wanted no weak points. "We need everything airtight," he muttered as he arranged the evidence. By late evening, phone notifications lit up across Colorado. News stations announced the scheduled court date. Social media erupted with discussions of the attack, the arrest, and the upcoming trial. Radio hosts debated Jason's actions. Elderly callers from small towns phoned in with opinions about justice and morality. The entire state seemed to be watching. In her hospital room, Emily sat quietly, hands folded over her belly. She felt stronger, but the thought of facing the courtroom still filled her with nerves. She looked out the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. She took a deep breath. Tomorrow would be another battle. But she was ready. The courthouse was alive long before the sun had fully risen. A line of people stretched from the front doors down the stone steps and onto the sidewalk. Most were older residents, many from nearby towns, bundled in coats and scarves as they waited patiently to witness justice unfold. The case had captured the attention of the entire state. News outlets called it one of the most disturbing domestic assault incidents in recent years. By 7 in the morning, the courtroom was already filled to capacity. Inside, the room buzzed with a mixture of anger and anticipation. The sound resembled a soft, restless hum echoing beneath the high wooden beams. Reporters set up their cameras and whispered instructions into microphones. Elderly attendees exchanged quiet remarks about morality, responsibility, and how the world had changed. A bailiff reminded everyone to turn off their phones, though many ignored him until the second warning. When the double doors finally opened, all conversations died instantly. Emily Dawson entered on her father's arm. She walked slowly but steadily, wearing a maternity support belt beneath her loose dress. Her face remained pale, but her posture held a quiet strength. Robert stayed close beside her, guiding her toward the front row reserved for the victim and family. He kept a protective hand near her back, ready to support her if she needed it. The sight of her bruises, still faintly visible, caused murmurs of sympathy throughout the courtroom. Several older women wiped tears. A few men nodded with solemn respect. Emily kept her gaze forward. Moments later, another door opened at the opposite side of the courtroom. Jason Hale entered, escorted by 2 deputies. He wore a wrinkled suit. His wrists were cuffed. His face looked drained of its former confidence, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. As he walked, cameras clicked in rapid succession, capturing every step. Behind him came Madison Cole. She looked even worse. Her hands trembled as they pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. Her face was pale, her lips bloodless, and her eyes wide with dread. She avoided looking anywhere except the floor. Her legs shook so noticeably that a deputy had to steady her arm as she approached the defense table. A row of journalists raised their microphones. The judge banged his gavel once, commanding silence. "Court is now in session." The live stream began broadcasting instantly. Television stations across Colorado carried the footage live. Many households, especially elderly viewers, watched with deep focus. This was the day the truth would be laid bare. The prosecutor rose and pressed a button on a small remote. The screen mounted on the wall lit up. A grainy hallway came into view. The timestamp showed the morning of the attack. The first part of the video showed Madison storming down the hospital corridor. Gasps echoed in the courtroom. The footage shifted. The second angle displayed the inside of Emily's room. Madison shoved the door open. She grabbed the collar of Emily's hospital gown. She yelled in her face. The footage showed the violent shake, the push, the fall. The fetal monitor crashing to the ground. The room erupted into horrified whispers. Someone in the audience muttered, "My God." Another covered her mouth with her hand. The judge raised a hand for silence again. The whispers faded. The prosecutor continued. He displayed photographs taken after the attack. Images of Emily's bruised arms appeared on the screen. The discoloration, the swelling, the imprints of fingers pressed into her skin. Emily looked down as the photos were shown. Robert placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Next came the printed messages taken from Madison's phone. Each message appeared on the large courtroom screen. "Go scare her. She won't fight back. I'm done with this marriage." Jason's head lowered as the words appeared. His hands shook uncontrollably. He refused to look at the screen, staring instead at the table in front of him. Madison covered her face and sobbed quietly. "This," the prosecutor said, gesturing at the evidence, "was deliberate cruelty." He paused to let the words settle. He paced slowly, letting the gravity of the moment fill the courtroom. This was not an accident. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a moment of uncontrolled emotion. It was a coordinated act of intimidation and violence. A pregnant woman, 7 months along, inside a hospital, left defenseless. The defense attorney shifted uncomfortably. He had no rebuttal, no explanation that could soften what everyone had just witnessed. He tried to argue procedural errors, but the evidence was overwhelming. The judge invited Emily to speak. She stood slowly with her father's assistance. Her voice trembled at first, but she steadied herself. She recounted the moment Madison burst into her room, the look of hatred in her eyes, the fear that gripped her body, the pain. And most devastating of all, the way Jason watched from the corner of the room without offering a single word to help her or save her. She described him walking away while she lay on the floor, clutching her stomach and crying for help. The courtroom fell silent. Every person seemed to hold their breath. The judge stared at Jason with disbelief and disgust. His eyes narrowed, his lips pressed tightly together. He looked as though he wished he could speak outside the confines of courtroom decorum. When Emily finished, she lowered herself back into her seat with Robert's help. Tears glistened in her eyes, but her expression showed strength. The judge turned to the bailiff. "Bring the jury out." The jury filed into the courtroom moments later and retook their seats. They had spent only a short time deliberating. Their expressions revealed everything. Many looked resolved. Some looked saddened, but none looked uncertain. The judge nodded. "Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor," the foreperson replied. The judge prepared to speak, lifting the gavel as the tension in the room grew so thick it felt tangible. Emily clutched her father's arm. Robert steadied her gently. Every breath in the courtroom seemed to pause as the judge prepared to announce the fate of Jason Hale and Madison Cole. And the entire state waited. The courtroom felt unnaturally still. The energy that had pulsed through it during the earlier hours of testimony and evidence had shifted into something heavier. Rows of people sat frozen in their seats as the judge returned from his chambers with a stack of documents in hand. His robe flowed behind him as he stepped up to the bench. Every sound seemed muted. Even the reporters waiting with cameras poised remained motionless. The judge cleared his throat. "This court will now deliver sentencing." The words dropped into the silence like stones into deep water. No one moved. No one breathed too loudly. It was as if the entire room collectively understood that the next few moments would define the future of everyone involved. Madison Cole stood first with trembling legs. Her attorney steadied her by the elbow. Her eyes were already red and swollen from hours of crying. She stared down at the floor, unable to face the audience or the victim whose life she had nearly shattered. The judge lifted the first document and began reading. "The defendant, Madison Cole, is hereby found guilty of felony assault on a pregnant woman." A wave of whispered reactions swept through the audience, but the judge lifted one hand for quiet. Madison collapsed to her knees, her sobs echoing in the quiet chamber. She covered her face with both hands, shoulders shaking violently. Her attorney attempted to pull her back to her feet, but her legs refused to hold her weight. "The sentence imposed," the judge continued, "is 12 years in state prison." Madison let out a broken wail. The bailiff stepped forward, lifting her gently to her feet. Tears streamed down her face. She looked helplessly toward Jason, but he did not return her gaze. He stood rigid, his expression pale, his eyes hollow. Fear had drained the last bit of defiance from him. The judge turned the page. "Jason Hale, please step forward." Jason approached slowly. His hands quivered with each step. The deputies remained close on either side of him. When he reached the defense table, he turned his head slightly and glanced in Emily's direction. That small motion contained a plea, a desperation, a final attempt to reach the woman he had betrayed. The judge began reading. "The defendant, Jason Hale, is hereby convicted of criminal negligence and incitement related to the assault in question." Emily felt her breath hitch. She placed one hand protectively over her belly. Robert stood firm beside her. "The imposed sentence," the judge continued, "is 18 years in state prison." Jason inhaled sharply, as if the words punched the air out of him. "Emily," he whispered hoarsely. "Emily, please." He looked at her with eyes full of panic and regret. Maybe he hoped for sympathy. Maybe he hoped that somewhere beneath the pain he caused, some part of her might still respond. Emily did not. She turned her face away, not angrily, not dramatically, simply with finality. She had nothing more to give him. Her silence felt louder than any words she could have spoken. Robert placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and protective. His touch reminded her that she was safe, that she was no longer under Jason's shadow, that she had come out of this darkness with strength she never knew she had. The judge spoke again, his voice firm. These acts were cruel. They were intentional. They demonstrated a disregard for human life and dignity. This court finds them to be acts of inhumanity. Cameras clicked as journalists captured the moment. The courtroom shifted back into a low buzz of murmurs. The judge signaled for order one last time. Madison was escorted toward the rear exit, reserved for convicted felons. Her sobs lingered faintly as she disappeared from sight. 2 guards took Jason by the arms. He did not resist. His face had lost all color. His body swayed slightly, as if the weight of his choices had finally crushed him. As he was handcuffed, camera flashes exploded across the room. Reporters shouted questions that Jason could not answer and likely would never be allowed to. His life, once polished and full of arrogance, had collapsed into a reality of cold steel and locked doors. The prosecutor approached Robert as the courtroom began to empty. He extended his hand. "We did it," he said with a quiet smile. "Justice was served today." Robert accepted the handshake. His grip was firm, but emotion simmered beneath his stoic expression. He nodded once, then turned back to his daughter. Emily inhaled a deep breath, one that seemed to fill her lungs more fully than any breath she had taken since the attack. She exhaled slowly, letting go of tension she had carried for days. Her shoulders relaxed for the first time in what felt like forever. She lowered her gaze to her stomach. As if sensing her relief, the baby moved gently inside her. A soft kick, a reminder that life was still fighting. Life was still growing. Life had survived the nightmare. Tears welled in Emily's eyes, but this time they were not tears of fear or pain. They were tears of release. Robert leaned down and embraced her. His voice broke as he whispered, "It's over. You're safe. Your baby is safe." She wrapped her arms around him, absorbing the warmth and certainty of his presence. Her father had been her shield, her anchor, her strength when hers had faltered. The bailiffs opened the side doors that led to the main hallway. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows outside, casting long golden lines across the polished floor. Emily and Robert walked out together, step by careful step. The air smelled cleaner. The world felt lighter. Reporters kept their distance, sensing she needed space. Emily's heart felt softer, brighter, stronger. She stepped into the sunlight with her father beside her, leaving behind the courtroom where justice had finally spoken. The sunlight over Colorado felt different after the trial. It was softer, warmer, gentler in a way that Emily Dawson had not felt in many months. When she stepped out of the hospital for the final time, her father walked beside her, carrying her small overnight bag in one hand and keeping the other ready in case she needed support. The chilly breeze brushed against her face, but she felt stronger now. She felt whole again. Emily returned home with her father that afternoon. Robert had already prepared the guest room for her, but when she walked through the doorway, she realized he had placed a small vase of fresh flowers on the dresser. They were white lilies, her favorite. She turned to him, and he gave her a small smile, the kind only a father could offer after surviving the unthinkable with his child. "We will stay here together for a while," he said. "You focus on resting. I will handle everything else. During the first few days, the house felt unusually quiet. Emily spent long hours resting on the living room couch, while her father moved around the kitchen, making soup or hot tea. He insisted she should save her strength. Each time she tried to help, he gently guided her back to the sofa, telling her the doctor wanted her off her feet. A week after the sentencing, Emily returned to the clinic for a follow-up appointment. The same doctor who had treated her during the crisis greeted her with a warm smile. He examined her carefully, checked her vitals, and listened to the steady rhythm of the baby's heartbeat. The sound filled the room like music. "The baby is stable," he said, "very strong. You have nothing to worry about at this stage." Emily felt her eyes fill with tears. Relief washed over her like a warm tide. When she stepped out of the clinic, the nurses at the reception desk clapped softly for her. The news spread quickly throughout the hospital that the baby was healthy. Many of the staff who had been working that night remembered her trauma vividly. Now they shared the joy of her recovery. That evening, Emily sat at the small dining table at home and wrote several handwritten letters. They were addressed to the doctors and nurses who had stood by her when she believed she might lose everything. She thanked them for their patience, their kindness, and their compassion. She sealed each envelope with care. Every morning, Robert prepared breakfast for her. Sometimes scrambled eggs. Sometimes oatmeal with warm cinnamon. The simple act became a ritual that filled the home with comfort. Emily often joined him at the kitchen counter, sipping tea while he cooked. They spoke more now than they had in years. The hardship had opened doors in their relationship. They talked about the baby, about her future plans, and even about her mother, whose absence felt less painful now that they had each other to lean on. One afternoon, Emily attended a support group for pregnant women who had survived abuse. The room was filled with soft chairs and warm lighting. Women of different ages shared their stories. When it was her turn to speak, Emily hesitated, but when she looked down at her belly and felt a gentle flutter, she found her courage. She told her story slowly and honestly. She spoke about fear, betrayal, and the quiet strength that had grown inside her. The other women listened with tears in their eyes. Her story gave them hope, and their presence gave her healing. Several days later, her doctor confirmed again that the baby was resilient. "Your little one is a fighter," he said. Emily cried softly with gratitude. She no longer carried fear in her chest, only peace. Back at home, she began preparing a small room for the baby. Robert helped her paint the walls a soft shade of cream. They spent an entire afternoon assembling furniture. When she grew tired, Robert urged her to sit and rest while he finished the work. By evening, the room looked warm and inviting. Emily stood in the doorway, imagining her baby sleeping peacefully inside. The next morning, Robert brought a surprise into the room. It was a wooden cradle he had made by hand in his workshop. The smooth curves of the frame and the carved edges showed hours of detailed craftsmanship. Emily pressed a hand to her mouth. Tears welled up as she stepped closer to touch the wood. "I made it for her," Robert said quietly. "She deserves something made with love." Emily wrapped her arms around him in a tight embrace. She had not cried like that since the day she testified in court. These tears were different, softer, healing. Over the next few weeks, cards and small gifts arrived from neighbors, local teachers, hospital staff, and even strangers who had watched the trial. Many messages were written in careful cursive. Most were from older residents who felt compelled to let her know she was not alone. She placed the cards in a small box. Knowing she would show them to her daughter someday, a television station reached out and asked if she would be willing to share her story publicly. Emily thought long and hard, then politely declined. She had survived enough spotlight. She wanted peace now. She wanted to protect the quiet life she was rebuilding. As the due date approached, the atmosphere inside the house grew warm and calm. Emily spent her evenings sitting with her father on the porch, sipping warm milk, while they watched the sky fade into shades of orange and purple. Robert often rested a hand on her shoulder, grateful for every peaceful moment. On a cool morning, just before dawn, Emily went into labor. Robert drove her to the hospital with calm precision. The delivery room was bright and welcoming. Nurses supported her with gentle encouragement. Hours passed in steady rhythms of effort and breathing, and then, at last, a newborn cry filled the room. Emily's daughter arrived healthy and strong, weighing 6 pounds and 3 ounces. When the nurse placed the baby in her arms, Emily felt as if her entire world had opened. She gazed at the tiny face, soft and peaceful, and whispered the name she had chosen long ago. "Hope. Your name is Hope." In that moment, everything she had endured felt distant, taken by the light, replaced by the pure miracle in her arms. Robert stood beside her, eyes filled with tears he did not try to hide. He rested a gentle hand on his granddaughter's back. Emily held Hope close to her chest. The newborn breathed softly, already calm in her mother's embrace. Emily smiled through her tears and whispered, "We made it." And for the first time in a long time, she truly believed it.